Nazis had entered Paris in June of 1940, and Paris had been basically under Nazi occupation for 4 years. When the Allies landed in Normandy, it was the beginning of the end for the Germans. So on August 19th, the FFI, which stands for France Force Intérieure, began to rise up and skirmishes broke out. The film takes place basically 5 days after that had begun. It was a very intense period in the history of Paris.
This project came about because I had done FAR, which is a very sweet, happy, romantic comedy. People had accused me of giving them diabetes because it's so sweet. And I wanted to do something completely the opposite for the next film. I wanted to entice Marion to write it because Marion's awesome as a writer and an actress. And on the fly, when I was describing the tone of this, I said, maybe we could be World War II. Knowing her as a friend, saying that that would actually appeal to her.
That's sort of my grandparents' era. They were journalists in Paris during World War II, and they talked a lot about their time there and what they saw and what happened to them, and it affected me a lot growing up. Those stories always kind of stuck with me, so I thought about that a lot when I was writing the story.
What I loved about the script when I got it back was I love single-minded characters. I love characters that are dedicated to a purpose. The fact that these resistance members were so dedicated to the job they had to do, that they would go, I have to get this information to this person. And the instant I walk out the door, I'm dead. It doesn't matter if I live or die. I just have to get the information there.
There was a certain, dignity to what these people were doing. And even though many of them had kind of accepted their fate, they went about their jobs with a lot of class.
What I hope audiences take away from Une Libération is hopefully just seeing a film that takes place during this era that might be a story that they don't know a lot about. I feel like what people sort of hear of the French resistance is sort of a lot of Hollywood ideas of what they do and who they are, and the thing I kind of pulled away was just how real and normal these people are. And what they went through was just extraordinary, and they had to make extraordinary choices, and tapping into that story a little bit and sharing a little bit of that with an audience is what I would hope to get out of it.
Hi, it's Brian Crewe. You're at Space Station Casting. We're auditioning our Nazi soldiers today.
Being at the auditions was an interesting process because I don't speak German, so Brian and I were looking for more of the emotional reaction than what they were actually saying.
And they were very difficult parts to cast because they had to be physical with the stunts, they had to speak German, and they had to be a very particular look and age.
Brian and I met pretty serendipitously. He was looking for locations when he was making FAR, and I was working in a restaurant at the time.
And he had found us one of our locations and was very helpful behind the scenes. And he had mentioned to me that he speaks German.
Brian was looking for someone that knew how to speak German to help him run his casting, and I know how to speak German.
So runter auf die Knie. Auf die Knie.
I asked him to read with all the other actors. So he was our reader and was playing against all the actors, and the very, very first guy that we auditioned was Mark.
My name is Mark Yeager.
Perfect. Okay, cool.
You get the call for an audition, so that's always the first step. And then you get the sides, you prepare. It's always exciting and a little nerve-wracking.
Warum haben Sie nicht aufgefordert, sie auszuziehen, bevor Sie ihn erschossen haben?
Ja, hat es überhaupt nicht für uns getan.
Ja, aber Sie hätten doch...
Mark just had this wonderful, kind of youthful quality.
Erst will ich wissen, was Sie vorhaben.
Nein. Das wollen Sie nicht, Schulte. Sie wollen hier nur raus.
Between the two of them, Matthew was very stern and emotional. I think Matthew's a father, and it just kind of like that scolding you kid thing comes out, especially when it's German. And I mean, it was one of the coolest and most bizarre moments of my directing career was doing the auditions and suddenly having these guys speaking German coming at me going, "Kommen Sie her!
Also kommen Sie sofort her!
Kommen Sie her!
Kommen Sie sofort her!
And it's like, it's terrifying.
Sofort!
Then I spent 3 hours reading with other actors and had a blast. Just got to play with the role and try all sorts of different things, and just kind of kept discovering who Schulte was over the, course of these 3 hours. And he called me the next day and said, "All right, gear up."
Hey, it's Brian. We are 6 days away from shooting, and it's Stunt Rehearsals.
I I loved the process of the stunt rehearsals a lot. I thought it was really fun. It was one of the things I was looking forward to the most.
The whole thing about this was I want to make a film with a fight. Let's go.
Stunt rehearsals, we spent 3 hours just kind of learning how to beat each other up.
I knew when we did the fight that it would be very broken up. You kind of do 1, 2, 3 moves, and then you go out of frame. And you 1, 2, 3 moves, and you go out of frame. So I wanted them to have a chance to play it like a play. That we could go through it from beginning to end and have a sense of the rhythm of it like a dance.
I think it's cool if you're up a little bit, actually. And then he kind of yanks you out. It's like, oh, shit.
Hugh was our stunt coordinator, and, you know, we met the other stunt actors who were doubling for us.
Fights are a physical performance as opposed to maybe an emotional performance, but they elicit a visceral and emotional reaction. He's choking at you, you're trying to do anything to get him, you're going at the hands.
Hugh pointed out when you're dancing or fighting with anybody, you have to have a connection. You look, you've got to have this sort of a silent communication. And so the beginning of that process is sort of developing this rapport, this communication.
Okay, yeah.
It's also a chance to play like you do in dialogue rehearsals, of finding moments, putting little extra beats in there, of making sure that that we're communicating emotions.
I'm not even freaked out by the fact that he's freaked out, but I'm like, to me, this is just...
I think the fact that he's freaked out grounds him. Yeah, you ever had that thing, you know, where like somebody freaks out and you're just like, you become the coolest guy in the room all of a sudden? Yeah.
Just to get the timing right and not to get hurt by your own clumsiness, but other than that, it's just fun.
I love doing stunt work so much, but I do have trouble where I think things that are super violent are kind of funny.
Oh, we're going to have a lot of fun.
We'll get down to it when we get down to it. And so sometimes Hugh, our stunt coordinator, would show me like some really vicious moves. Like he was showing me how to like gouge a guy's eyeballs out, you know, with like the ends of your thumb. And I was like crying. I was laughing so hard. I had to kind of try and tamp that down a lot and be like, no, it's for realsies, Marion. Come on.
Yeah. So it's something that you discover along the way,
right,
rather than actually doing that.
Right.
And that just sums up our director-producer.
We know the scenes we're going to do, they're present in the script. What I'm really interested in with actors is what's happened before that. On this film, I spent a lot of time working with Marion and Ross on talking about who they are, where they came from, how they met, how long they've known each other, what experiences they've been through together. And so we have a base going into the scenes.
Oui, je fais un lycée tous les prisonniers.
Ross Marquand became involved in the project because I had worked with him on a film about 2 years earlier, but I had seen him before that in a film where he was a Russian KGB agent. I was so impressed with his language skills with a very difficult accent to do that when we had this role, the character is supposed to be French and, you know, speaks some French in the beginning and has to have a French accent throughout. He was one of the first people that came to my mind as far as being an actor that would have the capability to be able to kind of do that in a language that wasn't necessarily his own.
For me, the biggest challenge and also the biggest thrill has been constructing that accent, making that believable. I've just been watching a lot of YouTube, watching a lot of old French films, and Vincent Cassel interviews, just kind of hearing his cadence and his flow, kind of picking that apart in a million different ways.
Marion and I had talked about in getting ready for rehearsals was trying to make sure we could build intimacy between her and Ross.
One of the things that Brian had us do was he set up this sort of kind of cafe situation, you know, kind of set up the chairs and tables and music in his living room, and he had Ross and I do this dance. He sort of set up a scenario where, you know, we were sort of our characters and we were meeting in a cafe and I had to exchange a message to him. But the way in which I was going to do it was by him asking me to dance and us doing the dance, and during the dance I give him the message and then we kind of go our separate ways. But obviously the dance is very loaded because it's two people who love each other very much but can't be in a relationship because of the circumstances of the war.
In that dance, there's all these kinds of wonderful little subtle moments of they're uncomfortable at first, and then she relaxes into it, and then it gets uncomfortable for her, and then he gets a lot more comfortable with it, and they're never quite on the same page, and I think they left that even frustrated with the relationship with each other. And I think that feeling of the ending of that dance was where they are at the start of this film.
It was really great because there was a lot going on in that, and we didn't really have to think about dialogue or anything else other than sort of really what we were feeling and yet still kind of accomplish this goal. It was like sort of a metaphor for the whole movie in kind of this one rehearsal moment, and it was great. It worked really well. I think the biggest thing that I've noticed in terms of how Brian has changed as a director is that he's much more ambitious, which I love. I just feel this kind of push to like do better, make it more interesting, and there's just kind of an urgency to his work now that I think is great and I really like.
With a period film, it gets very specific. It's really a constructed film. Everything from the way the camera moves, to what costumes we have on, to the sets we're doing, to the hair, to the makeup, it all is designed around conveying this period.
The most challenging aspect for this project was the entire project, the size and scope of the project. Locations were specifically challenging. Originally, this was set in a train tunnel. Trying to find a train tunnel we have access to in Los Angeles is difficult. So we adapted with the 6th Street Tunnel.
The tunnel itself, production has spray washed it and sanitized it to the degree that they can. That said, it is not clean like that word really applies to this. So please be very careful about touching stuff. You are downtown. Don't wander off any direction.
It's a very seedy place. Bottom line, it's a little nasty, but I think that only adds to us. I mean, if we're looking for authenticity, I mean, it doesn't get much better than this tunnel.
It's movie magic. I mean, we're downtown LA and we're recreating Paris in 1944.
We had this kind of above ground area where all our cars and trucks and the generator was, and that was pretty much the 21st century. And then you'd come around this corner and there was this gate built by a production designer, Amelia Brooke. And suddenly it's like, okay, this is 1944 Paris all of a sudden. There's hay on the ground. We had a little alcove that we had built to kind of connect to the Fort MacArthur set. George Foyt, my cinematographer, who I've known since I was at USC, did just a magnificent job. It's really the most beautiful product I've worked on in any capacity, director, producer, anything. The most surreal aspect of it, though, was every once in a while, this magic would be broken because one of the homeless guys who lives between downtown and the LA River would need to cross through our set to get back home. It was one of the more odd things, and Marion's sitting there with a fire marshal and a gun, and we have people wired up with squibs that are about to get shot due to the bag of cans just going through like, I need to get through, thank you very much. And it was very surreal.
This costume is actual wool reproduction. It's amazing how when you put on this Nazi uniform, you just move differently inherently. It's pretty fascinating.
It's also so authentic that it's scratchy and itchy, so they did a good job, and it looks awesome.
Nancy Fisher was very specific about, when we did when we were doing the costume test, we realized that the jacket that we wanted didn't really exist, so she hired a wonderful tailor who made this from scratch.
I really didn't know exactly what it would look like until I went to go try on the outfit for the first time, and it was perfect. It was exactly what I was picturing in my head. Once you kind of put everything in and you kind of look that way, you're like, all right, you guys have just done like all the work for me, so thanks a lot.
We will have some firearms. We'll be firing quarter loads. They're the smallest loads you can, but we're in a tunnel. It's super loud. I will insist on your protection when we're in here firing weapons. It's extremely loud.
Working with actors and guns are just like teaching anybody who's going to shoot for the first time. You walk through the process of how the tool works. A gun is a tool. How it works, where the dangers are, and you start out with the basics, and then you work your way up to what you need to shoot for the day.
So Hugh, what are we about to do?
We are about to kill Matthew.
Me, I'm dying. I usually do that.
And dying's a good living for him.
I feel like I shouldn't enjoy it as much as I do, because that's kind of wrong, and like, guns are not toys. But it's super fun. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it feels awesome, and and there's safety issues. You want to make sure everybody's okay, but then there's like that child part of you that's like, yay, I'm gonna find this gun. It's exciting.
Having Marion as a writer / co-star definitely does change how you approach it for me anyway, because you can always tell with the writer what they have in mind for a character. I really wanted to get very specific with her in terms of what she was trying to tell, what story she was trying to get out.
There are some days and some instances where the writer part of me kicks in, like, oh, it should look like this. This is what I meant it to be. And really, the film should be Brian's version of my material. Like I wrote it, but it's his vision. Trust is a big part of it, and it may not be exactly what I had in mind, but it shouldn't be, because I'm not directing the film. He responds, we look up at Cito, and then we go.
You got it.
Working with Brian as a director has been a real treat. He's got this great sense of both knowing what it is he wants, but also open to really being in the moment and seeing how is this moment progressing.
I think we like pushing each other and kind of, well, what about this? What about this? And you know, we just kind of have a second hand with each other that just makes pushing each other easier because we're not worried about like, oh, am I offending this? And oh, does he not want me to do that? Or you know, so I feel like we have the ability to push each other because we know each other so well.
What I want audiences to take away from Liberation, I want them to feel like they just lived in a war. I want them to feel the reality of what it was like to be in France at this time period. And I think that's the great metaphor that Marion had in her script of the tunnel for the war. They're constantly in this thing, and the tunnels have the beginning and the end, and they're nearing the end of this tunnel. But the question is who are you when you get out of that? And I really want audiences to question that, of what the circumstances of war do to you.
Okay, so he's just going to go in the direction that way, and then we're going to do the roll, so I end up in my back this way, and the gun is rocketed down that way. I think the silliest thing that happened on set was when Matthew and I, who plays Schultz, it was part of the fight where we had to roll over, and he's on top of me, and he's strangling me, and I'm just, you know, kind of trying to fend him off, and I don't know, it was like 3 or 4 takes in, we'd done it for a while, and just for whatever reason, when I was fumbling for him, my hand just slapped him in the face so hard, and we were in the tunnel, so it made this like echo, at least in my head, it made this like echo sound, like reverberated. And because I have this thing where, you know, violence is a little funny to me, as soon as I did it, I just started to laugh, and he got so mad at me, and he like came down, he's like, no, don't stop, stay in character. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Because as soon as I did the initial laugh, it was done. Like, I knew it was done. There was no saving it. And I felt really bad about it, and he seemed to think it was no big deal, but it's just really strange to be kind of this thing where, like, one moment you're, like, fighting for your life and someone's trying to kill you, and the next moment you're, like, laughing and pointing in their face, and that felt pretty silly.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. No, cut.